can describe it. I planned this lecture to have some methodological training sense, so with all my heart I encourage you to take part in the discussion and to suggest your own genius ideas. The lecture will consist of a preface and two parts. The first one will introduce the sound system of Chukchi in the typological aspect. The second one is a case study. The structure may remind you of school lessons when you have some theory and then practice. But my intention was a bit different. When you study aerial linguistics and languages of Russia, maybe one day your work results in a language description. So today's lecture can be seen as a simplified model of making a phonetic description of language. The first step is the study of literature, and the second, your own fieldwork and analysis. So this is what motivated the structure of our talk today. The preface is about descriptions. And at the end of my talk, we will discuss the text, your yesterday's homework. Polina Kasyanova, one of the authors of the Chukchi course and one of the best lecturers at the School of Linguistics, will help you. First of all, what do you think is necessary for a phonetic description of language? What do you want to see when you open a phonetic and phonology chapter in a grammar book? What do you think? No ideas?
Phonemes inventory.
Phonemes inventory, okay. What else?
The phonological structure of a word.
Word structure?
Phonotactic rules. Phonotactic rules.
Phonotactics?
Important parameters which make the table of phonemes. With parameters which are relevant for the language to classify.
Distinctive features.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. All of this. I think it is very useful to divide all these things into categories. For me, these categories depend on why do we need a phonetic description. The first reason is the same as for grammar chapters. We are linguists, we are interested in linguistics and in language, and phonetics and phonology are part of language studies. So we want to know how this aspect of language works, so we want this part in the grammar. Roughly speaking, this part is phonetics for phonetics, phonetics for phoneticians. Second thing is the following. We need some basic phonological information to study grammatic descriptions. Links between phonemes, sounds, and their positional variants are important when we deal with affixes and roots and words. We want to have an inventory of segmental and suprasegmental items, that's right. Consonants, vowels, stress, intonation, something like that. There are quite a few descriptions that contain only this basic information. Often you can find only a simple table of consonants and vowels and suprasegmental features and a list of phonological rules in a generative style. Descriptions of this type are concentrated on grammar, so they regard phonology as a background information, as a background information for studying grammar. Sometimes we must even analyze symbols chosen by the authors to understand what sounds they meant. So, in spite of this, most of these descriptions cope with their background functions. It's okay when you use only grammars and articles, but when you deal with the speakers, you collect texts, elucidate sentences, and check your own sentences. In these situations, you need need a more deep knowledge of the phonetic structures. Because you have to hear sentences correctly, to write them down. The fourth one is connected with this. In most cases, graphics is absent or is not enough. So we should create a proper transcription. Linguists whose primary interest is not phonetics usually deal with point 2. When they work in field, it's also 3 and 4. So at least the description should cover these 3 points. That's basic knowledge. We somehow have it in most grammars. The more detailed approach, the first point, is for phoneticians. In a convenient, up-to-date descriptions, as I see it, there should be both basic knowledge and detailed information. Modern technologies give us an opportunity to create an online version of a description with cross-references and hidden parts so that a reader could choose a more or less detailed style at any moment. When I went to Chukotko, I had a dream to make this kind of description of the Chukchi sound system. Here is what I thought my ideal phonetic description of Chukchi required. Very brief version. There are 2 columns here, a basic version and detailed information. In a basic version, we need a simple table with consonants and vowels in IPA and suprasegmental features. Detailed information can be connected with articulation of sounds and their positional variants, as well as basic acoustic information about segmental and suprasegmental units. We also can use examples of words containing segments, audio samples, as well as visible sound, spectrograms, spectral slices, if you want to see all of this with your own eyes. The basic version can also contain brief typological characteristics of the phonetic system, and detailed information can be also provided. Basic version can present alternations in a rule form, and of course it should contain self-consistent transcription and information about graphics. It seems to be nice to give a reader an opportunity to check what is said. For example, by giving the open access to some field materials. Besides, I would like to see some methodological appendix with all the necessary information, number of speakers, sociological information, technical equipment, recording conditions. As you see, that's not phonology, that's phonetics and pronunciation. I think that is what is underestimated about Chukchi, and today I'll be mainly concentrated on the questions of this type. We still know very little about suprasegmental features of Chukchi, and I will not pay much attention to them today. As you see, this table is not something new, but maybe you have something to say about it. What is not enough? What is not necessary? What do you think about this division?
What exactly is the point of putting visible sound? Do you mean like a sound wave, a spectrogram?
Yes, maybe a spectrogram, maybe sometimes spectral slice. When I just read words in a description, sometimes they are not verifiable. Of course, when I have one spectrogram, it is also not verifiable,
right.
But it is still more persuasive.
Sorry, what is the rule form?
There is a standard form of generative style that represent some changes, like And here I want to tell you again some important ideas and questions. Phonetic descriptions are used both for phoneticians, field researchers, and other linguists, and these categories of readers need different styles of description. And we can combine these styles, dividing the description into a basic part and detailed insertions. I encourage you all to keep these things in mind and to reflect over your attitude to a language description, not only to phonological description, but just think, how would you describe the fragment of language that is your field of interest. Now I'm passing to the first part. When you plan field research, you start with reading. We have already got 3 integral descriptions of Chukchi, as well as dozens of articles concerning particular aspects of grammar and phonology. And there are at least 2 dissertations on instrumental phonetics and on diachronic phonology. Thus we know much about the phonetics of Chukchi. It's not a small unknown language that nobody studied before. And we know enough to see that Chukchi is without exaggeration fascinating. The Chukchi people have chosen the best of the best, having one of the smallest inventories in the world. I'll show you vowel and consonant inventories and comment the most typologically interesting things. In this part, I base my speech mainly on Dunn's grammar and Skorik's grammar. And I also use the World Atlas of Language Structures. I'll start with vowels and then move to consonants. Before we discuss it, one question. How do you think? What is the average number of vowels in the languages of the world? Vowels. What's the average number?
5, 6.
5, 6. That's right. It's 5 or 6. It's 5 or 6. There are 6 vowels in Chukchi, and it's the average number for the languages of the world. We have schwa, and we have 5 basic vowels. These 5 basic vowels, except schwa, are the most common set for the world's languages. However, in one word or one compound, there can be only 4 vowels. And the reason is vowel harmony, yes. The reason is vowel harmony. As you know, vowel harmony is a long-distance assimilation of vowels. It's quite spread. One of the most well-known examples is a rounding and backness harmony in Turkic languages. In Chukchi, there are 2 sets of vowels. One word, one set. Schwa can combine with both sets. Guess what vowel quality is the base for harmony? Try to guess.
Could you please move to the names of the parameters? I just don't remember the word. Could you please turn back to the so height?
So we have height, backness, and levelization is an associated feature.
So height is relevant.
Yes, that's vowel height. And so, what's unusual in this table, in the division into 2 sets? Is there something strange?
Yeah, E is both in both sets. The same vowel is in both sets.
And if we look at this, maybe we would expect, yes, E to E, U to O, and then we would expect schwa to A, but this doesn't happen. It's E to A. You see? The question is, what's wrong with this E? Skorik says that these 2 E's are different, that the low E is more low and the high E is more high. Michael Dunn says that there is no any phonetic difference between these 2 vowels. I don't know who's right for our Ambuema dialect, and I'm going to find it out soon. And now, let's look at some examples of how the vowel harmony works. Here we have two aorist forms with the part with E. When the stem contains high vowels, it's okay, and the affix is E. When the stem contains a low vowel A, the affix changes, and E lowers to E. Low vowels always affect high vowels and change them. That's why we mark low harmony as plus harmony, and when there is no any influence, it's minus vowel harmony. Yesterday there was a question, what is VH plus and VH minus written near the some morphemes. Here it is, it's vowel harmony, plus and minus. No matter where is this vowel, a stem can be low or an affix can be low. When one stem is incorporated into another, they uniform the height of their vowels too. Yesterday, Losha told you that circumfix shows that two stems are in one compound. Vowel harmony also contributes to it. Look, we have upren, net, and yopatic to inspect, to check. And when we want to say to inspect net in one word, U changes to O and E changes to A, and we have co-prayopatic. Now it's your turn. Please try to incorporate and translate into Chukchi. As Dosha said yesterday, the head is rightwards, so in these words the order of stems is similar to English. I think 20 seconds will be enough. Is it clear?
Should we pronounce?
If you are ready.
I think that sweet cookie is Chukotko-Kamchatkan.
Excellent. And sweet porridge? You don't like sweet porridge, yes?
As it is. Yeah.
It depends which
It's okay, it's okay. Try again.
We should know to know which height is A, of which set is A. It will be of both sets.
You say about sweet?
Yes, as far as I understand, A would be in both sets, so we would know which this A is. Is this from the set which is of a higher height or of a lower height?
I see now.
But it doesn't matter here.
Huh?
But it doesn't matter here.
Well, it's
What
called
do you
how?
It does.
Oh, with how?
If it is low, it will be never Kamchatkan. Yeah? Isn't it?
No.
It would be, but yeah, but if, for example, when this sweet is a freestanding adjective, let's call it. Yeah, it would appear in a form. So, can you guess now?
Now we can.
Is it possible to see? Yeah, so when it's in a free form, when it's an so-called adjective, it would appear like this. So, is it high harmony word or low? Is it high harmony?
What determines vowel harmony in non-composite words? Is it the suffixes or the stem?
no distinction so roots do not have any priority over affixes. So if any affix, some affixes have plus vowel company, some affixes have minus vowel company, and if plus vowel company affix combines with minus vowel company root, the root will shift its harmony.
Okay.
So, but here when we see kin, we can guess that this root, that there are no plus vowel harmony morphemes in this root, because E belongs to minus vowel harmony.
Yeah, if it would be lower, it would be can instead of can instead of.
You said that's the affix what defines the vowel harmony. So if the affix kin is plus vowel harmony, and adverb can be both, right? Because it's a phoneme which can be both of the lowest set and of the highest. So here, in your example, does this kin actually show us something? Because
we can't have a low vowel and a high vowel in one set, so in one word. So if we have high vowels near this so we know that this is high . So we have a paradigm. When we know no forms, only one form, and we have no vocabulary, we can't guess. But we always have something else.
But then there are different types of suffixes, for example, right? So we've seen an example with this alloys marker or something like this plus the unit marker E, we changed to E, right? But at the same time, there is an encoding affix, which would be mo and contains O in it. And this affix kind of says, I'm the strongest one there. So if the root has the other harmony properties, it will adapt to the properties of the affix. So different affixes, they behave differently. Some of them will change the harmony of the root. So they kind of say, I'm really here. But on the contrary, there are some examples that say the root wins, and the root says, I'm the most prominent part of the word. So all affixes will change. And then there is an interesting thing like why in some cases the behavior is set up in one way, and then some other things behave differently. I don't know. But you can clearly see that there are different affixes that have different behavior.
okay, thank you.
It's not the case that we just say that it's the last set of these effects. It's a minus set.
Yes, that's it. Plus any plus morpheme will affect other morphemes if they are low, if they are minus.
Plus is low.
Yes.
So plus is low
Plus is low.
and minus is high.
Yes.
If we borrow some word from, for example, Russian with a, to which set will it belong?
Yeah, that's actually speakers differ in how they treat the borrowed words. So the borrowed Russian words, when my experience is, I think that when the word does not contain O and A, they would treat it like a minus vowel harmony. When a word when a borrowed Russian root contains O and A, it depends, because some Russian roots contain O and A, and for example E, and for example with root support, the boot, all all vowels are low according to Chukchi system, and so they will treat this word in the lower harmony. But when something is like kino, the cinema kino, I can experience that different people treat it differently. So some pronounced it as keno with low harmony, some pronounced it as kino with low harmony, so the affixes shifted. Some pronounced it as kino with high harmony. So it becomes it becomes rather messy.
But the only words are
I think I can came up with a particular word in mind, but I think they will treat it as minus, so it would not shift.
Thank you, Rosha. And now let's talk with vowels, and we'll turn to consonants. Here is the chart. The same question. How do you think? What's the average number of consonants in the languages of the world?
12.
12. What else?
Maybe 15 to 20.
15, 20,
10 to
10, 50, 50? 50? Okay, 15. Two more answers. I want two more answers.
20.
20 and
100.
100. Thank you. That's Sami language. 99 consonants. Okay. They are 22 or 23. 22 and 23 are the average. It's the average number of consonants. The World Atlas of Language Structures classifies languages and put them into 5 groups according to the number of consonants. The inventory of Chukchi, with its 13 consonants, should be characterized as small. 13 plus glottal stop, 14 consonants. It should be characterized as small. Small inventories make up 16% of all. Please look at the chart and tell me if you find any strange or unclear places, elements. We have here obstruent stops, o, t, k, k, and glottal stop. We have obstruent fricatives, h and s. We have sonorant nasals, m, n, approximants, w, y, g, and we have erotic sound. Nice set, and there are 2 very unusual things with it. First thing is the size-structure correspondence. According to Lindblom and Madison's well-known article, it's 1988, small inventories prefer simple articulations. When the inventory increases, complex articulations appear. In Chukchi, there are 3 consonants that Lindblom and Madison characterize as complex. They are uvular stop, h, velar approximant, l, and palatalized and voiceless lateral fricative, h. You see, Chukchi has a small inventory, but it contains items that are common to large inventories. That's very unusual. And the second thing is the percentage of sonorants. As you know, every consonant inventory divides into obstruents and sonorants. What's the difference between them? Anything? What's the difference between sonorants and obstruents?
The possibility of making a syllable. The possibility of making a syllable.
Making a syllable? Yes, that's right. I like it. But sometimes we have clusters that give rise to a syllable, even if there are no any sonorants. But that was good. Anything else? Sonorants.
From articulational point of view, the obstruents demand more obstacles, like inside your
Yes, that's right.
mouth. And sonorants are closer from this point of view, they're closer to vowels.
Yes, that's right. Articulation. That's the main thing. That's the main thing. When we produce obstruents, the airflow goes through a very narrow channel. That is the reason for fricative noise. And when we pronounce sonorants, the channel is wider, or there is no any narrowing at all. So they are closer to vowels. There are some acoustic evidence that there are two distinctive classes of elements. Obstruents are characterized by fricative noise, and we can usually say where it is concentrated. A typical sonorant has no fricative noise. Instead, it demonstrates a vowel-like form and structure. Higher formants are often weakened, but the general structure is easily seen on spectrograms. The third thing is phonology. Sonorant consonants often behave like vowels. They are usually transparent for some consonantal processes, like, for instance, voicing assimilations. They very often interact with vowels synchronically and diachronically.
There is a question.
Question?
I was just wondering about the exact pronunciation of the rhotic phonics. What's the exact pronunciation of the rhotic? Is it a trill?
Erotic, that's conversational. It can be a trill of 2 or 3 constructions. It can be a tap, like in Spanish, caro. It can be a flap, like in American English, I can't pronounce. And it can sometimes interchange with t, in the end of the syllable. It can also be fricative and approximant. So there are, it's very variable.
Is it all about Chukchi?
Yes,
Oh.
but one dialect of Chukchi.
Does it depend on does it depend on context or?
It depends on context, it depends on the speaker, it depends on how the dialect of a speaker is influenced by Russian. Because I think that there was one system of several variants of rhotic, and the Russian system has overlapped something like this. And now there are 2 systems at the same time in the speech of one person, so it's very complicated. Well, sonorants and obstruents. I've already mentioned an article, Lindblom and Madison, 1988. This article is devoted to the phonetic universals in consonants and is based on hundreds of languages. Lindblom and Madison insist there is a universal obstruent-sonorant proportion. Almost all languages of their sample have from 2/3 to 3/4 of obstruents, or on average 30% of sonorants and 70% of obstruents. It is the case of, for instance, English, Russian, Navajo, Arabic, Chinese, and Estonian. In Chukchi, there are 14 consonants, 7 are obstruents, and 7 are sonorants. You see that percent of sonorants is much more than it is universally noticed. Now, I will ask you to look at the chart again and to tell me what features are distinctive in Chukchi. What features distinguish between consonants? Does place of articulation distinguish between consonants?
Yes.
Does it? Yes. Okay. Does manner do this? Manner of articulation.
Yes.
Okay. T is stop. H is lateral.
Voices, they don't distinguish.
You know, sonorants and unsonants.
Yes. that is very unusual. I've heard that voice and voiceless consonants do not distinguish. Okay, yes. Yes, we have place and manner contrasts. We have no additional articulations. We have a palatalized h sound, but it is not distinctive, and we have no phonational contrast. All voiced consonants are sonorants. All voiceless consonants are obstruents. There are other languages where phonation is not distinctive in consonants. Guess how much languages of this type do we have? How many languages don't use voice to distinguish between consonants? Percent. 15?
10.
Huh?
10.
10?
100.
30.
Sorry, the other ones.
Do not distinguish.
Do not distinguish between, have no phonational contrast. More than 1/3 of the languages do not have distinction between voice and voiceless. That's much. 32%. These languages are mostly of Australia, New Zealand, Melanesia, and both Americas. So typologically, there is nothing unusual in the absence of phonational contrast. Not everything is unusual in Chukchi. I've just told you about the consonantal inventory and the typological characteristics of its structure. I already mentioned that 3 consonants do not fit to the small size of the inventory. Now I'll return to them to take a closer look. They are my favorites, and I'm sure that every Chukchi speaker must be proud of them. Uvular stop is the first one. Again, it's time to guess. How do you think? How common is uvular stop? How many languages have it?
27 of 100.
15%.
30.
25.
In reality, it's quite rare. Here you see the map from the World's Atlas of Language Structures. 17% of the world's languages have uvular consonants. But uvular stops and fricatives usually come together. In Chukchi, we have uvular stop and no fricatives. In the world's sample of 567 languages, there are only 38 languages like Chukchi. It makes up only 7%, where we have a uvular stop, but no uvular fricatives. The second is lateral obstruent. As you know, lateral consonants tend to be sonorants. Less than 10% have at least one lateral obstruent. In most of them, in most of the languages, there are both sonorant and obstruent laterals. In the world sample, there are only 8 languages, it's 1%, less than 1%, with one single lateral being obstruent. One of these 8 languages is Chukchi. We see these red circles. It's about Chukchi. Finally, the third thing is velar approximant. Guess again, what approximants are most common for the world's languages? How do you think? What approximants are the favorites?
Here and what?
Here and what? That's right. And languages that have all other approximants make up only 2% of the world's languages. And we have the sound in Chukchi. But to say that it is approximate, we should be sure that this voiced non-nasal velar sound in Chukchi is approximate, right? And at this point, I move to the second part of my talk. It's a real problem, and I invite you to follow me in solving it. Approximant or fricative. We have already come through several steps that a researcher does before going to the field to collect data for a description. We have thought of what we think of a description and its structure. We've read literature and now have some understanding of the sound system of Chukchi. But when there are two grammars of a language, there are two opinions on the problem. And when you create your own description, first of all, you have to check these contradictory points. I have chosen one of them. It's approximants. Some linguists say that labial v in Chukchi is sonorant and approximant. Others say it's obstruent fricative. The status of velar consonant is also conversational. While we don't know the answer, we can't even make a simple table with an inventory, and we can't even choose a symbol to write down. Now imagine, you read about a sound that it's fricative and then that it's approximant. What will you do to understand what is it? I remind you of the basic differences between sonorants and obstruents I have already mentioned. Maybe they can be of use. What will you do to understand? What is Chukchi, for example?
Maybe compare it to the most typical examples of those sounds in different languages to see if they fit the description.
Can you explain more?
I mean, we take some language where we have a typical, for example, typical obstruent, and compare the sound in Chukchi, compare it with this sound, and see if it fits, if it is like.
I like it. Good idea.
We also could clusterize sounds in vowels in Chukchi and consonant in Chukchi, try to cluster some typical parameters of all clusters and look at this this sound, look at how it deals with vowel parameters and obstruent parameters.
That works in Russian, where we have v that is just between obstruents and sonorants. Because in Russian we have 100% sonorants and 100% obstruents. And it's different to guess what should we compare it with, because there are the inventory is too little, but that's a good idea and it works in Russian. If we check all three things, we can't know what the articulation is. You understand? We can't know what the articulation is without special equipment. And if we have no special equipment, we can see, for example, that v is labialized, or it is labiodental, but it is hard to fix it. From the literature, we know that both labial v and velar g undergo devoicing. Next to voiceless obstruents, especially fricatives. In most languages, an obstruent becomes voiceless when there is a voiceless obstruent nearby. When it becomes voiceless, of course, it goes closer to fricatives. But is it still, is it fricative? In the languages of the world, sonorants often do not undergo devoicing near voiceless obstruents. But in Chukchi, there are strong tendencies for devoicing of everything. Devoicing of vowels after stress, devoicing of sonorants after stress. So when we want to use these processes, we should be very careful. these were arguments that tell us that these sounds are obstruents, so they can undergo the voicing. But at the same time, there are other arguments for our consonants being sonars. It's well known that labial V interacts with vowels in Chukchi, and interaction with vowels is one of the features of typical consonants. And we know that G can usually drop and disappear. And what about acoustics? There is one extensive acoustic study of Chukchi consonants made by Sinovsky. However, some points of it are not clear, and our data from Anguema seem to differ from those presented in this work. Anyway, we can't make the final decision of these two consonants without analyzing sound. First of all, I decided to find out what phonetic variants do our consonants have. When we went to Chukotka, I made a list of words to record. I tried to take into account most possible contexts. I recorded 11 people and received more than 1,000 words repeated at least 3 times each. I used my ears and I used broad spectrograms and oscillograms to analyze what I heard. As a result, I got this table with all phonetic variants of labial V and velar G I can hear and see. I use IPA symbols as they are quite convenient and can represent the diversity of articulations. We have there an approximant V and a fricative V and their palatalized and voiceless counterparts. We also have combinations of vowel U with these consonants. For a velar one, we also have approximants, plain and palatalized, and fricatives. And we also have some strange, rare variants like affricate and affricate, and a stop. And we also have a pharyngeal sound, G, here. Is there any symbols that are not clear in this table? So green color here marks approximants, and brown marks fricative obstruents. Black are conversational. Now let's maybe listen to several most common variants. I have here 7 recordings. Some of them contain W, some contain G. Your task is to choose what is there. Be attentive and try to hear what of these 10 most common sounds is presented. If you think that this set is not enough, please tell me. I'll play each recording twice.
You will hear such recording twice.
Yes.
I will play each recording twice, and I hope you will hear. Are you ready? Air conditioner help. Sorry.
It starts close.
Thank you. Well, the first one.
Maybe it's better to turn the lights off.
Turning off our ears.
Sound would be more.
No.
And not
They will do some sound.
And no breathing.
And close,
Oh no, that was
close your eyes
Sorry.
to
Sorry, I thought that was lights.
consider
Were lights.
Maybe you can come here in the center.
Maybe.
But it doesn't work this way. You have a...
Mhm. No?
I
It's very similar to hunted. But it's very.
We have it there. Not fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, should I try another?
Is the microphone on?
Hmm?
Is the microphone on?
Yes, it is.
try to say something new.
Ow, ow.
Okay.
I can pronounce it myself. No. Does not work.
We can use a copy and put your phone into copy and then take it down.
Do you have a cup? Ah.
Yeah, but what is it supposed to?
Эй, верни.
Там есть, там этот. There is a coffee.
Это будет хуже, да?
А вы той частью микрофон пустите? А колонок нету, да, вообще?
Есть проблемы с тобой?
Есть колонки. Ставить. Well, we can try again. I'm so sorry, let's do this.
It was better with the mic.
Mm-hmm.
The
So
mic was
maybe
here,
you can just
but
pronounce it. So,
I voted for A.
yeah.
or 10. Or 10. Or no.
It is 8, yes. Well, this speaker pronounced this word like hlig. So there was that is very fricative, and it's number 8. Next one is also hlig, but fiasco. Is also hlig, but the first one is pronounced like a sonorant, and the last one is totally devoiced. So it's like hlig, something like this. So the first one, it's number 7. It's very similar to vowel. And when I pronounce hlig, the last one is like 10. But it's difficult to understand whether it is devoiced 7 or devoiced 8. The third one was niechpich. So, what do you pronounce?
The first one?
Niechpich.
Or
First,
the third.
niechpich. My plan was to pronounce the 5th one, so without voicing. Niechpich. So it's like what, but totally voiced. Niechpich. Fourth one is awetvak. What's in awetvak?
first one
Firstly
is
the third one, and secondly the first one.
Yes, they are. Very well. So the first one is palatalized approximant, and the first one is non-palatalized approximant. The fifth one is elit. What is there? Number 7, yes. L is number 7. It's very vowel-like. Elit. And here we have eviluki.
like four.
My plan was to pronounce the fourth one. I'm very sorry that it does not work. So, eviluki. And the seventh one is taham. What is it? Taham.
It's like in Ukrainian, but you don't remember.
Yes, it's like Ukrainian, and we have Ukrainian here. 9. That's 9.
What's the difference between 9 and 8?
9 and 9, 8. 8 is velar, so it's like Russian g, but fricative. And 9 is pharyngeal, so it's like English h, but voiced. So 8 g, and 9 h. Do you see? What we can hear, not you but me, is diversity. And we already know what acoustic parameters are responsible for it. And although I can't let you hear, I can let you see. I'll show you 3 proud spectrograms of most typical variants of the labial sound. This one is avetva. It's the most sonorous one. As you see, it's very vowel-like. It has a very good formal structure. You can see this white, grey and black, maybe not so black, worms here in the picture. High formants are weaker. We see that they are more white there. But in other aspects, it's very similar to the neighboring vowels. That is a typical approximant. Being approximant is not a binary feature. So the first labial is more short and the formants are a bit weaker. They are not so black, you see. I can easily say where the vowel ends and the consonant begins. This approximant is a bit worse, but it is still an approximant. Avetva. Try to pronounce it if you want. Now look at this one. That's nechpich. What's the difference in the spectrogram? There is no voice, right? It's voiceless. We don't see this big black worm at the bottom of the spectrogram, so we don't have a basic frequency, and the vocal cords do not vibrate. It's voiceless. Here we see something between the previous one and the first one. We can see basic frequency, and we also can see fricative noise. All these things in all the spectrum. So there are no formants like this, there are no worms. It's typical fricative. Yes.
Excuse me, maybe that's a very important question. Are stops k and k affricative in Chukchi?
They are a bit affricates, as they are in all languages, because this part of our tongue is not so movable, you see, and that's why there are several constrictions and several bursts every time we pronounce k or k. K is more affricative in Chukchi, but k and k are also affricative. That's right.
Okay.
Well, you see on this picture, you see the devoicing after stress. Evifluki, U is under stress. Evifluki, and everything after U is devoiced on the record. Well, now we know how variable our consonants can be. We have even categorized them using IPA, but this is not enough. Next step is checking possible contexts and finding out which variants are preferable in different contexts. Well, I checked 8 positions and received and want to show you this table. It's a very simplified picture, but it's enough to illustrate the idea. The most common pronunciation of this labial sound is bilabial approximant. This variety is possible in all positions. In some contexts, obstruent labiodentals are preferred. But most people prefer approximants, although some people tend to use fricatives instead, and this may be the influence of Russian, where the corresponding sound is labiodental. In Chukchi, approximants are much more frequent than fricatives. They are used in all positions. They are preferred by most speakers. Fricatives are still popular, but less frequent. They are more constrained and have no obligatory status in any context. And the voicing is also not obligatory in any context. So I conclude that vo is rightfully considered to be approximant. The same thing is for the velar consonant. It is more context dependent than speaker dependent, but still most speakers tend to pronounce it as an approximant. It's also used in all positions, and there is no context for obligatory devoicing as well. Thus, we can say that the velar sound in Chukchi is also an approximant. To summarize our discussion, this is what we have just discussed. Describing phonetics and phonology, the sound system of Chukchi and typology, and this enigma of fricatives or approximants. And I hope that now we are a bit closer to an ideal description than we were 10 minutes ago. Well, that's all. You can see literature in the last slide, and now I think we still have 10 minutes for Polina to help you with your own text. But maybe you have some questions. Questions?
How do Chukchi people differ voiceless vowels?
Differ voiceless. How do you differ vowels when you hear whisper?
Okay, how do I?
The spectrum is the same, but when your vocal folds or when your vocal cords are vibrating, it's this vibration that is transformed by a vocal tract. And when you are whispering, it's a fricative noise that is produced by, I don't know how to, хрящи. I don't know how to name them in English. There are some parts of our pharynx that produce this noise, and this noise can be also transformed by your tract. So the spectrum, the form of the spectrum, is the same.
Okay, thank you.
That's a very complicated issue. Voiceless vowels, yes, they are studied.
We can distinguish different vowels even if there are more formats.
Even if there is no basic frequency.
So there are some formats, but there is no basic frequency.
Yes, because formats are very intensive parts of the spectrum. So some parts of the spectrum can be more intensive than others, even when there is no vibrations of vocal cords.
Okay, thank you.
And in the diachronic dimension, the three strange consonants you mentioned, are they of recent origin, or do they exist in the later languages?
They seem to have existed in languages for many hundreds of years. The reconstructions of Chukchi phonetic system contains these consonants, but they change differently in different languages, and in some languages there are no obstruent laterals, and they have only sonorants. Yes. They seem to be quite stable in this system.
So, for example, this lateral may be brought to Chukotko-Kamchatkan.
Maybe. Or Chukotko-Kamchatkan. If you have some questions, you can come to me after the lecture or during the dinner and maybe ask. And now I think that we can start with the text.
Okay, so here's the translation that you were supposed to give, more or less. So I'm not sure whether you get close enough or not. That's on you. So the first sentence is pretty easy. It just has this. Okay, I mean it's not that easy because the problem here is whether we want to interpret this adjective as a predicate or as a modifier. So the first, we could say that this is just a nominal predication. So line, reindeer, headers, they exist, or something like this. Or we could say that they are line, or the, yeah, there is a question.
And what about the intensifier? What part of meaning does it keep here?
Oh,
Very
yeah, very decisive.
Durable
Yeah.
line.
Yeah, exactly. So just a simple intensifier. So yeah. Right. Like usually I say, because I was doing the nominal predication in one of the field trip, that was one of my topics. I would say that this is it looks more like nominal predication and adjective as a modifier. That could be the usual interpretation. But we don't know, probably some information structure things are going on here, and that can influence the word order. So there are some cases suggested when the word order is changed. And the second sentence is also pretty easy. We have this stated form of the verb to go. Then we have this, well, we could say verbal or an evidential marker or something like this, recordative, I don't know. A particle, we haven't analyzed it yet, which can be literally translated as they say, or this is our common knowledge. Or like they say that they follow the get-like traces with a correlative marker, a case marker. But is it possible that they are big enough to leave a trace like that? So what we say is that our get flies are big, and are they big enough to leave a trace like that? So I would analyze it as two clauses. The first one would say they are big, and the second would be they leave traces. Why isn't big? Big, it can also be a subject probably. We're not sure here, so we already here see that there are some complicated things going on. I would translate it as, I would say that those are two different predications. The sentence is, the second clause, like both clauses are intransitive, as you can see by agreement there, and adjectives are intransitive. Okay, what else do we see here? So the whole interpretation of the text, probably you should know that this is supposed to be a joke, which we don't find funny because we're just not Chukchi people. Yes.
Which argument controls the person marker in this example?
A drop argument.
Yeah, but semantic.
Those would be a get fly.
Ah, okay.
But as it's prominent in discourse, it can be omitted.
But why it is singular?
Because it's generic reference. Is get fly big enough to leave a trace like this? Okay. So the point is that this is supposed to be a story about a maritime Chukchi who argues with the or says something about tundra people. So as you remember probably, Chukchis are divided into two types usually, the ones that live along the coastline and the ones that live in tundra and do some sort of reindeer breeding and reindeer herding. So a maritime Chukchi says that they cannot follow the get fly because it cannot leave a trace like this. And indeed, tundra people, they don't do that. Instead, they follow the herd because they're nomads, and the herd is trying to walk away from get flies that are approaching, and also the herders themselves try to make the herd as far away from the get flies that start appearing in the summer. So what they do is that they travel north because it's colder in there, which means that there are less insects. So when summer approaches, they start walking north because it's colder in there. So in some sort of sense, the situation is the opposite. They run away, chased by the get flies. And this is what this maritime Chukchi tried to say with this. Okay. Yes?
I have a question about that whole case. Can you explain a little bit more in detail how it works?
Yeah, so this is a correlative case, which means moving either like along a path or in the substance along a path or something like this. Yeah, so we can move some sort of like along a trace or along the track that could be there.
So it is this case what turns into our translation go into follow, yeah? Because like they move along this place.
That's a good question.
Yeah, actually, it not only remains along the path, but at least when, like, used with a noun road, when you go and road is in the correlative, so it can mean either that you go like nearby like along the road, you go somewhere you go nearby the road and the road is there, or you can just go, I don't know how to say, go by this road. Go, so you can be not nearby it, but just on them, so they can, like, they go by the trace.
But they use some road to get somewhere.
Yeah, you can this too. I'm not sure what exact interpretation is it there, but like.
Because when I tried to find some information on this case, there was something about by means, doing something by means of something else.
It can also
be like that.
A less literal interpretation.
How flexible are you with the gloss that you do? For the first one, it says reindeer herders are lying. If you said something like very deceitful, reindeer herders, is that necessarily wrong, or are you just trying to make the grammar fit so it works in English?
So it's the question about the between
yeah,
the translation line and
yeah,
So the point is that in this case we're not sure what exactly was meant, right? Because the Russian translation of the informal K was closer to something like this.
Yeah.
What was the translation?
All this line reindeer herders.
How do you say it in Russian?
So just our ideology is to, in our paper, to have a translation line most close to what our consultant says when he translates his text.
So I would suggest that this is a nominal predication and an adjective modifier, because usually when an adjective has to be analyzed as a predicate, it follows the subject. So we would expect reindeer herders to be first in the first position, and then also followed by the adjective. But here it is vice versa. So, but I don't know, like, if I would approach, I don't know, 10 native speakers and ask them to translate the sentence, I don't know what their judgments would be. Because the word order is relatively free, but there is a clear tendency for predicative adjectives to follow the noun and for modified adjectives to precede it.
So in this translation, lying is an adjective and not a part of the requested, present request.
No, I just decided that it's probably better to say it with this in English than just say lying reindeer herders and put it out. I don't know. Especially considering the fact that we're not sure about the translation.
Does it work so that we can take some other, in Chukchi, we can take some other positive adjective instead of deceitful, and using this circumfix create like a predication? By these better means.
So, okay, that's an interesting one. I don't remember whether Yosha was really talking about adjectives yesterday.
No.
If you're interested, I can send you a paper. Or, to cut a long story short, what I would say that we have those adjectival stems, and they either appear looking exactly like stative predicates, or they can appear as adverbs, in which case the suffix would change to an adverbial marker. So this is why what we do is we usually call those qualitative steps. They designate a quality, so there is no the distinction between adjectives and adverbs is on the one hand pretty bad, and on the other hand there is only that distinction between stative verbal forms and adjectival forms. Though they can be differentiated, verbs and adjectives they still can be differentiated. But the point is that you can insert different qualities, like qualitative stems in there, and they would all be marked with this stative predication marking. So this word by itself, it doesn't differentiate between stated verb predicates, adjectival forms as modifiers, or adjectival predicates. But then if we add some other things, then we can see what's going on.
So, for example, should they have another word for the verb to lie? Yeah? So it would be another step than this.
I don't remember how this verb looks like, but if it's a property, if it's like, I don't know, or if it's used habitually, so they habitually lie, so then we would use the exactly same form. I don't know whether the root would be the same, probably there is a special verb for this. But we would just insert the verbal root and everything would stay the same. But if you're interested, there is some data showing that intensifier prefixes and also approximative prefixes, they're inserted in different positions depending on the part of speech that they use. So verbs without quantities, adjectives. Okay, any other questions? Good.
Advertising.
And yeah, so come back on Thursday, and we'll see presenting me on ergativity, and I will presenting on inverse marking in agreement. And today we'll also have a special, extremely fun program. We'll see a movie, and what else?
Maybe try to play a Chukchi sport, Chukchi football or Chukchi American football, but actually the problem is that it must be played outdoors, but it's dark, so if you're like outraged